52. That is how many businesses are still listed on the mall directory at Tuttle Crossing just outside Columbus, Ohio. Half of what that board once held. And the number keeps shrinking. Someone filmed the empty corridors, posted it online, and hundreds of thousands of people watched a piece of ordinary American retail quietly go dark. You have seen it in your own town. A store you passed 1,000 times, gone. A parking lot half full at noon on a Saturday. A gate pulled down where a name used to be. Here is what makes this year strange. In the same 12 months that malls like Tuttle Crossing are shedding tenants, investors poured a record sum into American retail property. Retail now makes up 14% of all U.S. real estate investment, the highest share in a decade. Money flooding in, stores emptying out, same country, same year. So which is it? Is American retail collapsing or booming? The honest answer is both. And figuring out how both can be true at once is the whole story here. Because this is not one clean collapse. It is several different shocks landing on the same shelves at the same time, and almost nobody is putting those numbers in the same room. Start with the scale. CoreSite Research, which tracks store openings and closures week by week, projects about 7,900 U.S. store closures in 2026. By early February, more than 2,000 had already gone, 6 weeks into the year. Now hold that against the recent past. Last year closed with 8,270 stores shut. The year before that, roughly 8,800. Back in 2020, at the depth of the pandemic, more than 9,700. So on paper, this year is actually the lowest closure count in 3 years. Sit with how odd that is. The number is falling. And yet it still means nearly 8,000 storefronts going dark across the country. That is a slow bleed, not a sudden crash. And a slow bleed is easy to ignore until it is your street, your anchor store, your job. Here is the number that does not fit. Retail transaction volume hit $13.5 billion in the first quarter of 2026, up 5% from a year earlier. People with capital are buying retail like it is undervalued, while chains announce closure after closure. That contradiction is the knot at the center of this whole story, and it does not come loose until later. Consider a cook who spent years behind the grill at a White Castle in St. Paul, Minnesota. That building had served sliders in the same spot for 89 years. Not a franchise that limped along. A neighborhood fixture, then one day it simply stopped. No reopening planned, no new location down the road, no note on the door promising a comeback. The lights went off and stayed off. The building itself sold for $2.1 million to a buyer with no interest in flipping burgers. Keep that one in mind, because what happened to that lot tells you almost everything. Up close, every closing looks like its own bit of bad luck. A weak location, a bad lease, a tired concept. But step back, and the same handful of national forces keep turning up behind them. A court ruling in February that almost no one connects to their local mall. A tariff rule that legally cannot survive past late July. A department store cutting up to 10,000 jobs. And a projection from UBS that makes this year's numbers look small. There is even a retail chain that closed stores and grew its sales at the same time, which should tell you the word closure is doing a lot of hidden work. Not every store is closing, the ones that share a lot in common. Look at what they sell and the pattern jumps out. The stores emptying out fastest are not the ones you rush to in a crisis. They are the ones you visit when you feel a little flush. Mid-market apparel, department stores, furniture, drugstores, pizza chains, sporting goods, the middle of the market and the bottom of it. Start in San Antonio. When Saks off 5th closed inside North Star Mall in the spring, it left 80,000 square feet of empty floor behind it. That is the single largest store closure anywhere in the country so far this year. 80,000 square feet. Picture the size of a big box store, dark, with the fixtures still bolted to the walls. Then drive north to downtown Dallas. Neiman Marcus is closing a store that has stood on the same corner for nearly 120 years. 67 people work there. On September 30th, by the language in the filing itself, the entire facility closes, and every one of them is separated from employment. That is not a soft phrase. That is a date and a door. And here is where the pain gets a face. Because these closures are not just square footage, they are cashiers. One layoff tracker following 8 retail companies has already counted more than 10,000 jobs cut this year, led by Macy's shedding 1,000 positions in a single stroke. But the sharpest number belongs to Estée Lauder. The company deepened its cuts to affect up to 10,000 jobs, and more than 2/3 of them are concentrated in one place: cashier and demonstration roles at the lower performing store and department store counters. Think about who that is. Not the executives in the tower, the woman at the makeup counter who knows your shade, the person who rings you up. When a company trims from the top, it cuts vice presidents. When a company is bleeding from its stores, it cuts the register, and that is exactly where these cuts are landing. So who is bearing this? Meet Rosa. She works a cosmetics counter inside a mid-tier department store, the kind anchored to an aging mall on the edge of town. Her hours got cut first, then the demonstration budget, then the store went on the closure list. Multiply Rosa by the thousands, and you have the human shape of that 10,000 job number at Estée Lauder alone. Now stand back and look at the buildings themselves, because the geography tells the same story. The trouble is not spread evenly across every mall in America. It is pooling at the bottom. The lowest tier shopping centers, the Class C malls that ring up under $300 a year per square foot, carry a vacancy rate of 13.3%. The top-tier Class A malls, just 5.6%, more than double the empty space concentrated at the weakest end. That is the shape of it, not a flood rising over everyone equally, a crack running straight through the middle and the bottom of American retail while the top stays dry. If this kind of plain accounting is useful to you, the sort of look at the numbers that separates a real trend from a scary headline, a quiet tap of the like button helps this reporting reach other people trying to make sense of the same thing. Because notice what all of these have in common. The luxury store nobody could quite afford anymore, the middle market chain squeezed from both sides, the cashier who cost too much to keep on the floor. Every one of them was already fragile. And this year, something specific arrived to push them over. It began in a courtroom in Washington, 3 time zones from the emptying storefront on your street. On February 20th, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that the president's original tariff law never authorized what he had done with it. The so-called Liberation Day tariffs, the ones retailers had spent a year building into their prices, were struck down. For about 48 hours, importers thought relief was coming. It wasn't. Within days, the White House reached for a different statute, Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, a flat 10% surcharge on nearly everything coming into the country, invoking a law that had never once been used this way in its 50-year history. The old tariffs died in court. A new one took their place before the ink was dry. And that replacement carries a hard expiration written into the law itself, set to run out on July 24th, with no power for the president to extend it alone. Think about what that does to a store owner. You cannot price a sweater when the tax on it might vanish in weeks or double by fall. That is not a market. That is a coin flip. Then it got wider. In March, the U.S. Trade Representative opened 2 fresh investigations proposing new duties of 10 to 12.5% on 46 different countries. So even as one tariff was set to expire, the machinery for the next one was already turning. An apparel chain put it bluntly in its own filing. The new tariffs were piling onto roughly $110 million in import duties it was already paying. That is not a rounding error. That is a wound. Now layer the second shock on top of the first. While the courts and the trade lawyers fought over tariffs, the Strait of Hormuz caught fire. After attacks on commercial ships, the U.S. launched new strikes, and the president declared the interim deal with Iran effectively over. Oil moved the moment the news hit, and gas at the pump followed almost overnight. The national average now sits near $3.80 a gallon. In California, drivers are paying north of $5.45. And here is the cruel mechanics of it. As one economist has described the pattern, when oil jumps, gas prices rocket up within a week. When oil falls, they drift back down in slow motion over weeks. Rockets going up, feathers coming down. Your tank feels the increase long before it ever feels the relief. Every extra dollar at the pump is a dollar that does not walk into a store. Which brings us to the quietest number in this whole chain, and maybe the loudest. In May of this year, consumer credit shrank, not slowed, shrank. For the first time since 2024, Americans paid back more than they borrowed. Revolving credit, the credit card debt that has floated so much discretionary spending, fell at an annualized rate of 4.7%. Read that as a country flinching. When people stop reaching for the card, they stop buying the thing on the shelf. Tariff whiplash, a fuel shock from halfway around the world, and a nation quietly closing its wallet. 3 separate pressures, none of them a villain you can point at, all landing on the same fragile stores in the same few months. Here's a genuine question worth your answer. When did you personally start pulling back? And what was the first thing you cut? Drop it in the comments. The pattern in those replies tells you more than any survey. But notice something. Every cause here is about the shopper, the price, the wallet, which leaves one force we haven't touched. Some of these stores emptied out because of people who never set foot inside them. That sounds like a riddle. It isn't. It's a payroll decision made in a glass tower 1,000 miles from the mall. Start with Amazon. In January, the company eliminated about 16,000 corporate roles. That came on top of 14,000 cut back in October of the year before. 30,000 desks, gone in a few months from one company. And here is the part that reaches into a shopping center. Every one of those salaries was somebody's discretionary spending. The new coat, the dinner out, the impulse buy at the register. When a corporate job disappears in Seattle, a mid-market store in Ohio feels it 3 months later and never knows why. This is spreading across the whole white-collar economy. Nearly 40 companies have announced layoffs this year. A survey from the World Economic Forum found that 41% of companies worldwide expect artificial intelligence to force workforce cuts within 5 years. 4 in 10 employers already planning to need fewer people. The customer base retail was built to serve is being quietly thinned out, one restructuring memo at a time. Now follow the money one layer deeper into a place you never see. Private credit is the lending that keeps thousands of mid-sized American businesses alive, and it is under strain. BlackRock TCP Capital is one of these lenders. Its share value has fallen 53% since 2021 as the loans it made to Main Street companies went bad. When a fund like that bleeds, the businesses it financed get starved of the cash to make payroll and rent. That's a remodeling company laying off workers. A restaurant group closing locations. Pressure you feel at the strip mall, born in a spreadsheet you'll never open. And then there's the third force, the coldest one. Sometimes the store closes not because the business failed, but because the business succeeded at being in the wrong place. Restaurant food and labor costs have each climbed about 35% over 5 years, according to the National Restaurant Association. The margins get thinner. The rent stays high. And at some point, an operator does the math and realizes the dirt under the building is worth more than anything he could ever cook and sell on top of it. Which brings us back to that White Castle in St. Paul. 89 years on the same corner. When it finally closed, the building sold for $2.1 million. And here's the detail that tells the whole story. The buyer wasn't in the restaurant business at all. Ask the longtime cook who worked the grill there, and the answer isn't sentimental, it's practical. The griddle still worked. The customers still came. What changed was underneath their feet. The land the restaurant sat on had quietly become the valuable thing, more valuable than any number of slider sales could justify. The business wasn't losing. The real estate was winning. And when the property is worth more empty than full, no amount of loyal regulars can keep the doors open. That is the force nobody watching a parking lot would ever guess. You see a shuttered storefront and assume the shoppers stopped coming. Sometimes they did, but sometimes the shoppers never left, and the store closed anyway because a fund failed, or an algorithm replaced a customer, or a buyer wanted the ground more than the going concern. Which is why you cannot point to one villain, a tariff, a layoff, a lending fund, a land value, different stores, different killers, all in the same season. And it complicates the picture in a way most people miss. Because if not every closure means failure, then the reverse might also be true. Some of the chains shutting doors this year are at the very same time opening them. Look at Fossil, the watch and accessories brand. It spent this year cutting stores, 7 of them in the first quarter alone, on a plan to trim $100 million in costs. And then something odd happened. Its full-price stores started performing better, so the company pulled back on its own downsizing. Its finance chief now expects up to 15 closures for the whole year, not the deeper cuts once planned. A retailer walking back its own retreat because the remaining stores got healthier. That is not a company dying, that is a company choosing which stores to keep. Now look at Tilly's, a California clothing chain. It grew its physical store sales by 12% last year, while operating 18 fewer stores than before. Fewer doors, more money through them. When you read a headline that says a chain closed stores, you picture decline. Sometimes what you are actually seeing is a company cutting the weak locations and pouring everything into the strong ones. The word for that is not collapse, the word is pruning. And this is where the paradox from the beginning finally resolves. The record investment money and the record closures are not fighting each other. They are the same decision, seen from two sides. Capital is not fleeing retail. It is stampeding toward the good half and abandoning the bad half. Fewer stores, stronger stores, more dollars per square foot. That is why transaction volume can run into the tens of billions in a year, while thousands of storefronts go dark. The money and the emptiness are describing the exact same split. You can see it in the parking lots too if you know where to look. Walk into an enclosed mall and the atrium echoes. Walk into an open-air center down the road, the kind with a grocery anchor and a coffee shop and a lot you park right in front of, and it is busier than a year ago. Foot traffic at those open-air centers rose 5% over the past year. Same season, same shoppers. They just moved a few miles and changed the kind of place they spend an afternoon. Even the malls themselves are splitting down the middle. The top-tier centers, the ones with the luxury anchors and the 95% occupancy, sit only 4% below where their crowds were before the pandemic. The weaker malls lag 9% behind and keep falling. One kind is nearly whole. The other is bleeding tenants month after month. Lumping them into a single number called the American Mall hides the only fact that matters, which is which mall you are standing in. Here is the part that should recalibrate everything you have heard about this year. The firm tracking all of it, the one projecting roughly 7,900 closures for 2026, calls that the lowest closure count in 3 years, lower than last year, lower than the year before, far below the pandemic peak. By the raw tally, the bleeding is slowing, not speeding up. So why does it feel like the opposite? Because the closures are concentrating. When 100 weak stores fail and 100 strong ones expand, the national number barely moves, but your town only feels the empty one. The half that is thriving is somewhere else on a nicer corner in a richer county. The half that is dying is on your street. A smaller total, landing harder in the places least able to absorb it. Which means the real question was never how many stores closed this year. That number is falling. The question is who is left standing when the sorting is done, and what the losing side has to give up next. Which brings us to the number this whole story has been circling. The 7,900 stores closing this year are not the ones that should keep you up at night. The bank UBS ran the math further out, and the figure it landed on is 80,000. Not this year. By 2028, up to 80,000 American storefronts gone in the span of 2 years, as online shopping keeps eating the floor beneath them. Now hold that against the malls. Capital One Shopping Research estimates that up to 87% of large American shopping malls could close over the coming decade. Between 2016 and 2025, a net 14,610 mall stores already went dark. That was the warm-up. The projection ahead is the main event. And the closings already scheduled tell you exactly where it lands first. Papa Murphy's parent company plans to shut 68 underperforming locations over the next 6 to 9 months. 7-Eleven is closing 645 convenience stores. Walgreens is working through roughly 1,200 pharmacy closures. Notice what those three have in common. They are not luxury. They are the everyday corner, the place you grab a prescription, a slice, a gallon of milk on the way home. That is the part that reaches your street, not the department store you visited twice a year. The neighborhood option you used without thinking, the one that made a 5-minute errand a 5-minute errand instead of a 20-minute drive. When those thin out, the country does not look poorer overnight. It just gets less convenient, one closed door at a time, in the places that already had the fewest doors. And the jobs go the same quiet way. That White Castle in St. Paul fed the neighborhood for 89 years. It did not vanish in a bankruptcy, no court filing, no headline chain going under. The company simply decided the land was worth more than the burgers, sold the building for $2.1 million, and moved on. The lot did not reopen as a restaurant, it became real estate. Ask the person who cooked there. A job like that doesn't end with a warning notice or a news story. It ends with a lease that runs out and a padlock that doesn't come off. There is no villain to name, no bankruptcy to blame, just a calculation done in an office far away, where the building beneath your shift was quietly worth more empty than it was with you in it. That is the thread running under every closure in this report. Up close, each one looks like bad luck. Step back, and they trace to the same handful of forces: cheaper alternatives online, households pulling back on credit, and real estate that pencils out better vacant. Which force hit a given store tells you whether it's ever coming back. Most of the time, the answer is no. If following how these pieces actually fit together is worth your time, subscribing keeps this kind of reporting coming as the picture keeps shifting. And if you know someone who works retail, or who just watched a familiar sign come down on their own corner, send this to them. It explains what the local news usually can't. Because here is what the empty storefront on your street is really telling you. It is not proof the American store is dying. The strongest ones are richer than they have ever been. What you are watching is a sorting. The market is deciding which corners are worth keeping and which are worth cashing out. The stores are not disappearing. They are being pulled toward the places with money and away from the places without it. So watch 3 things over the next year: whether that 10% tariff surcharge is allowed to expire on July 24th or gets replaced again, whether revolving credit keeps shrinking or Americans start borrowing to spend once more, and which everyday corners in your own county close next, because that is where the sorting shows up first and where it costs ordinary people the most.